Good morning, YouTubers, Pythonistas, geeks, world game players, design scientists, friends, Romans, countrymen. Lend me your ears, right? I'm thinking about Rome, where I grew up, and I had a pretty benign experience of Rome, of course. It's a beautiful place, Italy in general, but thinking back to the Roman Empire and the oppressiveness of Rome, and therefore of what we might call fascism, that's a theme too, given what's going on today, where people are wanting to push their nation state fantasy. I'll say fantasy. I mean, it's a real thing. We all dream and believe and live in our heads. So the fact that the planet doesn't know about nations, you could say, and they're not seen from space, so what, right? I mean, most of our concepts are like that. They have little visible outward. They need symbols to stay alive. And in Roman times, they did have a good use of branding and symbols, just as we do today. So I was, on Medium chatting with this guy who's sure that America is, or the United States is falling into fascism. A lot of people feel that way right now. And I think, therefore, it pays to revisit some of the etymology here. And, Wikipedia is very clear that, the symbol was already in use before Mussolini. And the swastika doesn't really have much to do with Nazis in Asia either. So it's like, don't get all bent out of shape, haha. Right? So there's a way to sort of take the edge off, but not when things are going the way they're going. And what the writer on Medium is talking about, and I'm responding, is threats to deport your political opposition, or doing worse, but that's pretty bad. It's like there are a lot of telltale signs, and we have people who never lived through World War II. Most people alive today did not. They don't have a visceral memory, and so that's very thematic in my last few YouTubes, and I gather will continue to be. Going back to Russiagate, therefore, because that's part of the story. This was a very well done piece of art, I have to say. I put that in my World Game Museum. It's got the electrical pylons, it's got this silhouette, and this scary looking voodoo guy. Looks like Voodoo Donuts guy. I'll get the Voodoo Donuts guy up. If you haven't seen that, I like him. Voodoo Donuts. And I'll go to images and you'll see what I mean. So let's see, where's the logo for this? I don't want to see the donuts. Come on, man. Show me the logo. Wow, they're good at not showing the logo in here. Let's say Voodoo Donut logo. How about that? Voodoo Donut logo. There we go. It's got the bones around his neck, right? It looks just like this Russiagate guy. So, for kind of this reason, I was thinking that QAnon, which I write about in this essay, right? I'm talking about Russiagate and where it's going, where it's not going. This is way before the Mueller report and all that. I saw it was fizzling anyway. And I thought, maybe QAnon is this whole phenomenon going to dig deep enough that it's going to strike gold. And because they're already getting into Mockingbird and Voodoo Donut even a little bit on a Pizzagate sort of wavelength, at some point they're going to hit pay dirt in the form of Ed Applewhite, Edgar, who was very involved in the Mockingbird and was co-conspirator with Bucky Fuller on his initiatives, right? So synergetics and so on. So, hey, here's a way for people to tap into their own American history. Same thing when Trump gave his July 4th speech and mentioned Alexander Graham Bell. It wouldn't take a genius to start connecting dots there as well. And remembering that, wow, what did Bell get into after that? Now, I think a lot of people would have searched on Bell probably after the speech because of the controversy that maybe he was as much Scottish or Canadian as American, and the whole question of citizenship is kind of blurry sometimes, which is thematic. But then they would have stumbled on, oh, so he was really into the isotropic vector matrix, as Fuller called it, octet truss, as Fuller patented it. And so there's your entree, right? So you're looking for something esoteric to get all QE about. Here's something to get esoteric about. Wow, breadcrumbs, they led somewhere. But didn't really happen. So what happened is I more or less end up mocking the QAnons for not daring to go there, I guess, right? They didn't have what it takes. But they represent what I put some hope in, which is that this whole generation of people who want to base their personalities as YouTubers on research are going to eventually discover their own history and then start connecting the dots and then realize their responsibility to shape the future based on all this raw material, which does not dictate the future. It only gives energy. Energy. So, what am I talking about? Well, the calculator of tomorrow has been my sort of recasting of the Jupyter Notebook environment, which is where I generate the face-centered cubic matrix, what we call the FCC, also the CCP, same as the IVM, same as the octet truss in a lot of ways. It's whether you're looking at the spheres or the rods or what. And I use quadratic coordinates. Now, these don't have to take over in any sense. Everybody gets threatened. Anytime you introduce something a little bit different in math, that's especially threatening because math is, I'll have to say it, the most fascist of disciplines in some way. They like to hit you with blackboards covered with squiggles that you'll never understand, but which broadcast an aura of, but we know, even if you don't. Like, we are the authorities here. We've got it all figured out. Here's a blackboard of squiggles to prove it. And then we have all these amazing things that we can do, right? And so trust us, we are the future, right? And people who tend to make it simpler and easier, they are a threat. And like Feynman with his Feynman diagrams, just drawing little pictures of things going on between the particles in the particle zoo, the energy states, the conservation of quantum numbers, and so on. Feynman diagrams were considered very subversive at the time. Like they always tell you about the conference where he first introduced them. A lot of people exploded. And I think it's because of kind of a Bourbachian wish to keep mathematics inscrutable, kind of a firewall, and only the initiates, the priests, are allowed behind it. And anything that seems to simplify and streamline is a threat to that regime in a way. So that's another thread. I've got some more in my blogs about that. So I don't think Fuller's synergetics is designed to be that way. It's not inscrutable. And I say that because it's written in prose. It's like the first sort of geometry that you're going to find that it's all written out in prose, right? So it's designed to be accessible to people who just know how to read without necessarily knowing a lot of how to read math squiggles, right? He avoids squiggles. So that's what's not fascist about synergetics. It's also what keeps it a metaphoric language and what keeps it in the humanities. And yet from synergetics, we're able to derive all kinds of interesting new branches worthy of exploration. And I, as a AA battery, sort of Smart guy who went to Princeton, but no super genius that I can tell, just willing to keep plugging away. I've seen developments in my lifetime that are encouraging, and I think that with more people signing on to this future and taking the time to do some digging, we could make a lot more progress a lot faster than if we just leave it up to a few AA batteries. For example, the Dymaxion house, this metallic yurt that Fuller hoped we might want to live in, I think there's no reason to abandon that branch and say, oh, that was a failure. No, Fuller backed away from it. He didn't want to have what happened to the car happen to the house. It was too valuable. The car was driven off the road. There was like a speed contest, and it's like, I'll race you. This is my understanding. And the guy in the other car was a well connected kind of crime boss, you could call him, in Chicago politics. Now, Fuller was no stranger to Chicago. I think Al Capone would carry his wife's groceries up the stairs sometimes, is my understanding. Look for that somewhere. So, Fuller knew what he was up against in terms of, if they could blame him for the failure of the Dymaxion house as well as the car, that might doom the Dymaxion house. So he did back away. I think he didn't have enough confidence that it had been tested enough and so on. And then there's a lot of finger pointing in history as to whether the bankers or the unions, there's always a bad guy when something good doesn't happen that might have. But it's not too late, is what I'm saying. Hey, Boeing, you're having trouble staying in the airplane market with a 737. Here's a whole new industry. They keep writing every so often, the industry missed. Well, how about we stop missing that industry? We do need to prototype. We need to create some demonstrations. We need to let people live in them. We have huge refugee cities already in need of better solutions than just tents. There are vast opportunities here. So I went to OSCON again this morning, Friday. I didn't quite understand how closed down things would be by now. It's like it ended yesterday, really. And I took the day off so I could study and do some work and so on. So when I got there, everything was locked up, and I didn't get my C60 back. It's probably sitting in a lost and found somewhere, and I'll probably get it back eventually. But C60 is it's a physical artifact and a way to access, if you wanted to, quadrate coordinates. I have another version of it here. So again, all the centers of these icosahedra are the same as Alexander Graham Bell's center. It's the same as really the most important matrix in crystallography, you could say. More so even than XYZ in terms of if you need a shadow scaffolding, like if you wanted to have an invisible space frame with reference to which you'll put your atoms to describe your lattice, you'll do well to start with the octet truss. And this is no mystery to crystallographers what I'm talking about, such as Dr. Arthur Loeb, who wrote the preface to Synergetics. And I think that's partly why Applewhite, collaborator, not discovered by Mockingbird, or not discovered by QAnon very much, would go and talk to crystallographers sometimes, and why they called him the Ayatollah of the tetrahedron. Because he understood that, looking back, coming back from the future, if we were going to embrace the positive futurism of one of America's greatest futurists, it would probably start in the curriculum somewhere, not in politics. I don't expect anyone, even presidential candidate Yang, to start telling us to study Buckminster Fuller or something. I don't think politicians are curriculum advisors. but universities, they are. So I'm looking at universities and saying, why not introduce quadrays? Not because you're trying to take over 100 and 200 years of vector analysis. I've been reading again my history of vector analysis. Just fit it in somewhere, wedge it in, shoehorn it in, talk about, you know, are these four basis vectors? No, because linear independence, but yes, because if we don't allow rotation or negation as an operation, a primitive operation, you can reverse a vector, but if you don't need to do that to reach all points in space, like pure vector addition with these four basis vectors will get us to any point in space, right? You just add the three you need in whatever linear combination to reach out in that quadrant, right? So a certain amount of the up and these 2 feet will take you anywhere in this quadrant, and there are 4 quadrants. So one of your coordinates is always 0 because there's always one vector pointing away from the quadrant you don't need in order to reach that point, right? It's pretty easy to teach. Once you've learned X, Y, Z, just throw this in. It's high school accessible. And then, wow, this is different and it's kind of exotic. And I've got the Python all worked out, so you can write your own vector class based on it or use mine. It's open source. And then take it off into what Fuller meant by 4D, which is all explained in great detail with lots of links in my YouTube. So I'm saying that if you're a college professor and you want to work in this piece of the humanities puzzle, American literature, American history, into your curriculum, the work is there and done for you in a very accessible manner. Assign my YouTubes as homework if you want. Get the word out there that we do have an option to not descend into a fascist hell if we don't want to. Like it's on a silver plate. Now I think this Russia Gate meme with the scary voodoo guy and the pylons, that's meant to, in some ways, scare a lot of people off from even talking about electrical grids. Like once you do, you're entering the scary world of spy versus spy, and it's treacherous, and it's kind of like unauthorized personnel keep out is the attitude they're hoping to create there. But given the disasters in California, and given we really do need to talk about more than just pipelines, like oil is so retro. I know it's important, and I know about peak oil, and I know we're going to run out and blah, blah. And that's what Fuller called starter fluid, or it's like our savings account. If we spend down all the oil and didn't use the opportunity, the window to build up what else we could do, that was a big mistake, right? And getting the grid able to accept distributed energy resources that have variable output like solar and wind, that's something we need intelligent conversation about, not, oh, that's too scary because it's all related to Cold War talk. We can't let these memes scare us away, is what I'm saying. So if you're out there queuing on, follow the breadcrumbs. I'm sorry you're so slow, but maybe some of you researchers out there in YouTube land are going to, because it's a lot of adults on the treadmill raising their families now. They don't have any chance to sit back and think or find any of this. They're too busy driving the bus around, which is very honorable work. I respect people doing honorable work, but there's a lot of people who do have time to sit around and watch a lot of YouTubes and try to make a difference. And if you're young, you have the most to lose in a way. People like me, the edge of the boomer generation, I've had a good life, right? And, I don't have that many years left, but you, if you're young, have a lot to lose if we go into a crazy fascist hell. So I think it's to your advantage to study history and pay some attention to the options that are there for you should you wish to take advantage. All right, talk to you soon.